we're building an actual classification system for radio frequency. So it's not just for the competition, we're trying to solve a real world problem and develop a solution to sell to our clients.
It is time for a demo. We'll exercise the process of identifying data sources. And by the end of this demo, you'll understand what data sources and data components mean in the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So we have here our MITRE ATT&CK framework. For this exercise, we're going to look at enterprise tactics. And within the enterprise tactics, lateral movement. And you see here, it consists of these techniques that adversaries use to enter and control remote systems on the network. And as we scroll down here, we can start looking at the different items and the different types of lateral movement tactics. We see here, we got exploitation of remote services. We got internal spear phishing, and you get the idea. So we come down here, let's look at T1021. As you can see here, remote services. Adversaries may use valid accounts to log into a service that accepts remote connections, such as Telnet, SSH, and BNC. Of course, those are all very popular services. But what you want to look at here is the different protocols. And what we see here is .002 within the T1021. And you can see here it's SMB, server message block, Windows admin shares, and adversaries may use valid accounts to interact with a remote network share using server message block, SMB. The adversary may then perform actions of the logged on user. So these are the types of things you want to look at when you're doing your research. Well, how do you learn more? Click. So if we click on remote services, we get a sub menu that starts talking about all the information and talks about how organizations can be subject to lateral movement. And then you actually see the tactic of lateral movement. But right below that, we have platforms, ESXi, infrastructure as a service, Linux, Windows, and Mac OS. Pretty much everybody. If we scroll down here, we got the different examples. And the nice thing about this is it shows you what groups have been using this tactic. And you see here, let's look at one, Ember Bear. And it says Ember Bear has valid network credentials and it uses the M-Packet framework. All these are different things you use when you're doing your actual adversary emulation. You want to learn how all these different things work. So we'll go back here to the tactic and you just go back to lateral movement, remote services. So that's pretty easy, how you get different types of things. And you want to experiment and look at the different types of ways that these hacking groups are doing all these different types of attacks. Secure Shell is very popular, as you see right there. Of course, Windows Remote Management is another one that people like to target. T1055, and you see what this is. It's a process injection sub-technique. Now we have tactics, defense evasion, privilege escalation, and you see this is injecting code into processes. So that's kind of one of the main ones that you have in a architecture when you're dealing with a sophisticated threat. They do not allow any type of file system manipulation. So we come down here, you see this was actually used on the 2015 Ukraine electric power attack. And you start looking around here, you got Agent Tesla eject into known vulnerability binaries. Andromeda was another one. So you might want to take a few minutes and look at this when you're doing your practice and going through the different steps of adversary emulation. So we've got process monitoring here. So we've got a lot of different things we can do. So we can scroll down and see even more information. And Cobalt Strike, even though it's a good guy tool, has been leveraged by hackers as a bad guy tool. And it happens a lot. Tool gets too powerful, the hackers can use it as well. So if we come over here and we go process memory, we can start looking at the actual injected process memory. This is another one that's very popular. And remember, on a Unix Linux system, everything's a file. So it's made easier by that. All of these are ways that an attack can take place. So when you're going through and doing your research, let's go DLL injection, dynamic link library. And you can see here where it's talking about this create remote thread. And that calls the load library. And that's what loads the DLL. So what happens in injection is I can map the actual process to where it doesn't load the normal DLL, but it loads my malicious DLL. And that's a form of what we call DLL injection, another type of attack. And with adversary emulation, you want to emulate these different types of attacks. So now when you start looking at your DLLs, you get additional information. Now remember, since we know it uses these API calls, we can set up mitigations where we actually look for those API calls. So you come down here, you can see the different ones that's been, and there's been quite a few. Once again, we have Cobalt Strike. It's back again. Comrade, a remote access Trojan. That's another one as well. And you get the idea. So what you do is you keep working through this actual wonderful reference, and you keep extracting data from it. And you just keep reading and think of it as a puzzle. And you start taking this puzzle and you start answering questions about who you're going to emulate as a threat. And you see some of them's got a really long list of things. One of my favorites for years is poison ivy. Not poison ivy to get poison ivy. Yeah, that's terrible. But poison ivy as a process remote access tool, a RAT. It's been around for years. As you see here, the actual information from 2017. I've known it around even more than that. And you see, what does it do? Well, it auto starts execution by modifying the actual registry, right? So this is always key, because what we usually do when Windows is acting up is what? We tell everybody to reboot it. Well, these sophisticated tools know that. And when you go to reboot it, it's going to infect the system deeper. And that's kind of how this whole process works. In this case, we got DLL monitoring. You look for the dynamic link library load. And I just did this. When you do API monitoring, you look for Windows API calls. And this is how you practice and look at the different ways. So let's look at one more here and we'll conclude the demo. So we got command and scripting interpreter. So now we can actually use the interpreter. One of the things is PowerShell was great as a utility, but also gave the hackers a lot of power as well. And you can see here the information taking place. And Chopstick, which is one of the ones I've dealt with on quite a few occasions, is part of this infection technique. So all these are different mechanisms of how you can go about as an adversary attacking. So when we start doing our research, we identify what techniques our attacking group use. In this case, we're going to look at this fictional group later on called Shadow Vortex. And what they do is Shadow Vortex, they actually use different types of lateral movement, primarily Windows type lateral movement, because it's a Windows type of attack. We'll look at Dragonfly, and you see that group's attributed to Russia. And it's got information about that since 2010. Now, what's important here is you start looking at the groups, and you can start putting a picture together as you see here with the table of techniques used. And look here, it's even hit Citrix and Microsoft Exchange services. Very powerful tool. And with that, we've accomplished what we wanted to in this demonstration, and we'll conclude the demonstration here.